right. Hello, welcome everybody. It's nice to see everyone here. Rhonda, you missed our shout out to how easy you make interviews. So just wanted to let you know you're getting the love. All right, so we're gonna jump in tonight. Tonight we're already at session 7. It's flying by, I feel like. I don't know how you all feel. We're gonna talk tonight about either you could go to the next slide if you like. The coin model, the interrupt phase. So we'll cover any questions you might have had about the content there. Again, I just want to keep reminding everybody that if you do want to review, go back to that original Foundations course video for some language you might want to use. I'm saying that again and again because a few months from now, when you set up your first workshop or group or coaching session, and you go to get all your materials and you're kind of like, what am I going to say for this section or that section? That's a really good time to go brush up and kind of get some like refreshers. It's just sort of triggers like, oh yeah, this is the part I'd like to share with my client on this. So just want to keep reinforcing that. So we'll talk about the RUTS worksheet. And we'll do just a touch on executive function, and then we'll get into some executing themes. So let's start first. Actually, you know what? I'd like to just start with any questions before we get into it. And then Adam, I'd like you to talk about executive function because that's a little mini lecture piece.
Yeah.
But I want to see if anyone has questions generally about this section.
I'm just having some technical difficulties here with the slides, so give me just a moment here to figure out
I just want to ask one question, please.
Yeah.
What's Burning Man? You were talking about Burning Man in one of the things. I've never heard of it. No idea.
Oh, who talked about Burning Man?
You did.
In the video.
Geez, go ahead, explain, because I don't know much about it. I reference things I have no business referencing all the time, and that'd be probably an example.
I thought it was an American reference.
I'm going to give you some images of Burning Man, which might explain it a little better than I can verbally. So it's a huge festival that happens every year, I think, and I've never been, so
it happens every year in the desert in Nevada.
And it is pretty wild. It started as a much smaller kind of really totally avant-garde kind of expression. It's since grown to what becomes almost a small city. And they do a lot of things where they build artwork, and then at the end they usually do like a huge bonfire. So that's a short version.
Thank you. Now I know.
Does anybody want to add to that before we move on?
Has anyone been?
Somebody was.
I've been.
And did I nail it? Do you want to add anything? Was it wild? Was it fun? Was it creative?
I was there in '97, my first year in Colorado. Second year in Colorado. And my friends and I went to Burning Man. It's interesting. It was a good time. I know it's way different. It's way bigger now, and it was pretty big then.
Yeah.
You get a campsite, and it's like you get a road destination, and that's your campsite, and you have to bring all of your supplies because you are in the desert, and it's anything goes.
Anything goes.
I'm gonna just I mean, there's like no
there. Yeah.
There are tents set up, and I have friends that go now, so I know it's like 20 times more than it was when I went. But there are tents set up where you can go and kind of experience anything you want.
Yep.
Your choice, as active as you want to be, and it is very artistic expression, freedom, kind of just and I'm not much of I'm not a huge camper, but so for me to go to the desert and pitch a tent for a week or whatever was quite an adventure. I had to give coordinates, like to in case something happened, I had to give like these coordinates to my family in case somebody
Yeah, it's
needed
really
to,
in the
that
middle
was
of
my
nowhere.
identification number. It was just weird.
Yeah,
It's
that's
dumb.
oh, thank
Well,
you.
I think it's a good segue into executive function, actually,
Yeah.
because I mean, you know, if Burning Man is this place where, you know, people can do whatever they want. There aren't really any rules. Probably there's like rules would be like you're not allowed to harm somebody else or something like that, you know. Okay, but other than that, like do whatever. And so we need somebody to help come along and be like, all right, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe that's not a healthy behavior. Um, and so we have rules, we have executive function, we have someone who plays that role of executive who says, here's what you're allowed to do and here's what you're not allowed to do. You were on that path, you need to stop and go in a different direction. That's what executive function is. You know, it's like the executive branch of the government is the one who enforces the rules. And
Very nice segue, Adam.
I know, right? So I'm not talking about politics now. I'm just talking about in our heads, we have this animal side, this what's called the limbic system, where, you know, a lot of our, you know, early animal instincts and functions that are just, you know, the raw necessary ones to survival take place, and they don't happen as a result of executive function. I can't think my way to making my heart stop. Does that make sense? My breathing is going to happen outside of executive function. It's going to happen really, really deep, deep, deep in the limbic system, kind of at the brain stem, you know, and that's kind of how our, you know, what came first. And then we have this sort of layer called the prefrontal cortex over it. And that prefrontal cortex is the part of our brains that when someone's not being reasonable, we say, did someone drop you on your head? You know, because we're saying, is there something wrong with you that you're not able to manage yourself? You're not able to make good decisions. You're not able to rein in unproductive, harmful, inappropriate behaviors. So we have executive function that allows us to do higher order things, allows us to work in offices and be professionals and have scientists and have people who work with information and data, higher functioning kind of things. That's what we're allowed to do. So the reason we talk about executive function is because that's the domain we're talking about whenever we talk about our themes, our patterns of behavior, and our strengths. A lot of those things happen in that prefrontal cortex. And so when we learn about things like our themes, for example, like just remember when you started to put language to themes and you started to begin to understand, oh, I have this theme. I'm gonna share our PowerPoint slides so we can just kind of look at some of them. Oh, I have analytical in my top 5. That explains, you know, here, you know, well, Katerina's doing the online version with her analytical, but with this analytical theme, it gives you language for something that's happening in your prefrontal cortex, a way of thinking about things that is a very well-developed way of thinking for Jim. Whereas we'll take Vicky, who has maximizer as her dominant pattern of what's going on in her prefrontal cortex. How can we maximize this? How can we make this the best it can be? What would take it to the next level versus the analytical thinking of what's the pattern here? What does the data tell me? What do the facts reveal? And we begin to start to label certain patterns that are happening inside of us. And so there's a real tie-in here between the StrengthsFinder and executive function. But then beyond that, what happens when we learn to take the analytical or the maximizer and say, in these conditions, it's working at its best. I've noticed that it really comes to life when I work with this person or I do this task. I want more of that. Oh, I notice it goes off the rails in situations like this, and I need to manage that better. I need to, you know, exert a little more executive function over my themes. We're able to do that now. And it should make you begin to say, wow, what other things are just being handled somewhere in the background of my executive function without me even knowing it, because I've been doing it with my themes all my life. What else is there? And so bringing it to the foreground a little bit, we're able to to know these patterns in ourselves. And then we start to see patterns in the other people, and we learn how to manage those patterns better. So that's a little bit about executive function. I guess, I wanted to draw that connection and then see if you guys had any questions, thoughts, or reactions to that. I don't know what exactly, just this idea that executive function is the domain of where themes reside. And the COIN model, for example, is an executive function exercise. You're helping people ramp up their executive function with it. So yeah, that's all.
It's really just self-control, learning, don't you think? That's what we're learning is self-control here.
A lot of it, yeah. I mean, we could call it emotional intelligence, where it's like, wow, not only do I have feelings, which everybody does, but now I can name them, and now I can begin to say wonder where they came from, and inquire into that, and understand why I'm emotionally responding this way. And then I could decide what's the most healthy way to respond in this situation. Is this emotion appropriate? Yes, it is. Well, in this case, all right. Well, what can I do? What would be the right response to do with how to handle this emotion? Or wow, this emotion really is out of whack in this case. I need to recognize that, understand that's happening, and then really maybe do some work to learn about where that emotion came from, what triggered it, and how to form patterns that might be more productive. Yeah, we forgive kids for not being able to do this, but we don't forgive adults for not being able to do this.
I think there's an expectation that adults should by now have figured it out.
Yep.
And oftentimes we do. Yeah, I mean, that's where we get our growth and maturity. So, I'll never forget. Can I share a story?
Yes.
I'll never forget the first time. I hope this applies, but I never will forget the first time that I recognized I was in the middle of what I call a trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was so bizarre. I had called a friend because I had just created my first online class. This is about 2 years ago. And she's in New York, and she's actually one of my old coaches. Like, I went through extensive coaching program with her. So I call, and now we're friends, right? And so I call her up and I'm like, hey girl, how did I say that? I said, I have got an opportunity for you. And that word, I think it was the word opportunity. She thought I was calling her with a network marketing opportunity. And she said, what's up? She was very odd. Like, as soon as I said, hey, I got something I think you're going to want to see, an opportunity for you. It was like an opportunity for training, right?
Mm-hmm.
For her to come in. I wanted her to see my training. And I was not 2 sentences in to sharing my excitement when she said, I have some feedback for you, which is exactly how they trained us in this training, was feedback. And all of a sudden, she was my coach again. And I remember I was outside, watering or something while I was on my headset. And I remember hearing in my ears the rushing of energy, blood, whatever, was happening at that moment. And when she was talking to me, it sounded like Charlie Brown, wonk, wonk, wonk. Like, I couldn't even understand what she's saying because I was literally, I could feel myself shutting down. And all I wanted to do was hang up the phone on her. Like, inside my head, I could hear screaming, like, hang up, just walk away. Just, that feeling of running, which was, so it kind of, my experience of this in my life is that when one of your talents goes down, then the rest of, usually they're 2 to tango. They like right back up there, together. So anyway, it was interesting because at the end of when she finished her chastising, I said, can I just ask you to repeat what you just said? Because I'm afraid I want to make sure that I understand. And she said, how could you question my feedback? I mean, she went like full gangster coach mode, on me. I said, I'm very serious about what I'm saying. I want to make sure that I have complete clarity about what you're saying. And she explained it. And I ended up, after I realized that word triggered her. And then she in turn triggered me and shut me down. And I didn't feel heard, which is why the want, and all that rushing feeling and all that anxiety came up for me. It's just kind of interesting when you can go through it as it's happening and make a choice like you're talking about.
This is such an important point, and every human needs to understand this about themselves. But I didn't learn it till I was well into my 30s, and it's what you described as being triggered would also be something called an amygdala hijack. And what people mean by that is there's a little part of the brain called the amygdala. It's shaped like an almond, and it's very small, and it's our emotional response center. So what happens is our amygdala does not distinguish between physical threat, like threat to our very survival, like saber-toothed tiger threat, or some kind of aggressor with a weapon, like that level threat, physical threat versus emotional threat or social threat. Our amygdala doesn't distinguish between that. And so we will respond in very similar ways. And that's just an example of the limbic system taking over the prefrontal cortex, the executive function. Our emotions will hijack it because it's faster and it's stronger. Our limbic system. I have a little presentation on this that I talk about, where we have to learn to manage that reaction, the fight or flight response. It's actually at least 3 responses. It's fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
There's the freeze response, which is dissociation, like, whoa, what's going on? And you don't feel the immediate effects because you've checked out, you've sort of distanced yourself from it. And yes, this is all relevant to executive function and to managing our themes. If if we are in environments that constantly feel threatening to us, we're not able to access our executive function as effectively. We're not the best versions of ourselves. We're lower versions of ourselves when we find ourselves in aggressive environments or environments that are very threatening. So this really ties back to individual environment fit or contrast alignment. Anyway, so there are lots of connections in here. I think we need to move on, but so Felinda, let me turn it back to you if you're there. I think you went off video. Let me see. Does anybody have?
I was fixing, my computer was freezing. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that. But I think this is a great point and a great tie-in to ruts, because, I mean, as Rhonda, you're describing like an extreme and very quick trigger. And I think that especially in communication, we often, that was like this momentary mismatch, right? Like just one word, she's in a rut, now she's, it's a mismatch. It's like an extreme mismatch. And I like this talk about executive function, and I like that example because we have a choice, if we choose to take those. When we can. Of course, there's the safety versus survival piece that we're really kind of is outside of our scope with these ideas of mismatch. But when we can apply our executive function, and we can apply our choice, and we can recognize those mismatches, recognize that pattern of feeling, that internal quick response, or the thought pattern that comes up, or the behavior pattern. If we can just pay attention to that observation place, and we recognize them as ruts, and then we can go into our themes and sort of say, okay, what, why, and how, we have more information to make an informed choice, where we're not kind of feeling that negative stuck place. We actually have a positive direction. And I don't mean positive as in like the warm, kind of fuzzy, light hearted. It can mean that, but it can also mean just like if you're going in a negative direction, you don't want to keep sliding in that negative direction. You want some positive energy to take a little more forward momentum. So I think that that all ties in so well to our ruts discussion, you know, and how we interrupt those themes and why we would want to do so.
It sometimes just happens so fast.
Oh, yes. I think that that's
more often than not, I think it happens.
Yeah.
So fast.
Oh, yeah. Especially when you're with another person or people, you know, it's like sometimes you're just going along thinking things are one way and then, whoa, you know, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, what?
I said the wrong word and now everything tumbles. Bam.
There's a word that used to be a big deal. It used to be way more of a value in society than it is today. And it's almost like we need to bring it back. The word is equanimity. It's a word that, like, I heard it recently and I'm like, what? I should know what that means, or I feel like I should, but I don't. And I looked it up. It's maintaining your composure in the face of different events that you wouldn't, you know, regardless of what you face, you maintain yourself and your integrity in the face of it. You know, like today I was at the acupuncturist and I was trying to stay calm but she's about to jab me with the needle. Now, usually they don't hurt, but it's like, I know there's a needle going in. So I was trying to maintain my breathing with equanimity. Like, I deliberately thought of that word. I didn't do such a great job, but I also did better than I would have normally. You know what I mean? Like it was practice. We have to practice these things. And mental practice. And what we practice, we're developing mental muscles, or the equivalent, which is neural pathways. That's what our themes are. They're very strong. That's why we use the word strengths in relation to them, even though we got to be careful about how we do it. Is strength is a measure of how much force you can resist. So in a physical sense, we say you have strength when you can resist heavier weights. Well, in a non-physical way, we're talking about your ability to resist whatever pressure to perform in this arena. Oh, my analytical is great at responding to those kinds of tasks. You know, my analytical can do that stuff up all day. Oh, great. Well, what about emotions? Well, my empathy may not be so great at emotions, although there's no reason it couldn't be great at emotions, by the way, because there's a way analytical could be applied very usefully. But now let's look at empathy. And I read today an article, and it wasn't a StrengthsFinder article or anything, but it was saying that 1 to 2% of the population are super empathizers, which means they empathize so strongly they actually will feel bodily sensations that may be mirrored in the other person. They may pick up on that.
All the time they do.
Well, that's freaky and amazing.
I have a daughter with empathy number 2, and she physically, and not only that, she can feel it from cross continent.
Well, that's pretty powerful.
For one of her people. She will send a text message or a phone call or something, and she'll go, "Hey girl, everything okay?" Nope. Not okay. She has a knowing, but she also physically feels people and their energy.
So yeah, I'll try to find that article and you can share it with your.
You need to hang around with us. You need to hang around with the connectedness empathy healers like I do.
Well, or I'll just hang around with you and you can be my representative to that group, my envoy. But anyway, so yeah, there we go. Executive function and all that great stuff. It all just fits together, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to actually, Adam, I'm going to pause for a second because I think you're freezing up periodically, and I thought it was me, so I was trying to fix my my program. So if you wouldn't maybe just close a few programs or something, see if that does it.
Good, thanks.
But I think that was great, and we do actually have some empathy in this group, by the way. But I'd like to actually move us into our discussion of our RUTS worksheet. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I want to make sure we get to our discussion of the themes as well. So would anybody like to share an example or two from their RUTS worksheet? And we do this worksheet in the context of kind of the bigger picture. But what we were talking about a few minutes ago is really often how it shows up in life. And yes, there are those bigger patterns where you're kind of like, oh, why is this one bothering me? Or, oh, I'm in this situation, or maybe this job isn't the best fit, or this role, or whatever. But often you're going to be using ruts in the moment. And so we do this worksheet as that more big picture, but really with the intention of saying, once you recognize that, you can just catch a hold of it so much faster. So yeah, would anyone like to share an example? Did anybody do the homework? I know at least 2 people did that I've already seen.
Yeah. Belinda, I can talk a little bit about it if you want.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I know I have restorative and empathy in my top 5. I think about this a great deal as I move forward in my pursuit of my master's degree. Because I already have a tendency to not take care of myself very well when it comes to emotional and stuff like that, emotional care, personal care, stuff like that. I tend to put other people way ahead of me. And then when I hit my wall, I shut down completely. But I have often thought about that as I move forward into this additional pursuit, if you will. As much as I have intellection, empathy, restorative, and I like to take in all this information and problem solve, how is that going to work? How is that going to work when it gets to be too much for me and I just shut down? Like, I don't manage it well.
I think that's a great point, Diane, because especially, okay, so let's talk about in the mental health field. If you're somebody with restorative and empathy going in, and you've identified those as potential ruts, then you're going to be looking at some things proactively. And that's what I'd like for everyone here to kind of extrapolate and get for their own themes too, is that if you know that going in, you're going to be looking at making sure you're protective of your resilience, and you're setting up support systems, and you're setting up ways that, you know, you might not slide into those potential patterns, right? Those recurring unconscious traps. Once they become conscious, we have the ability to do something about them. And so, for example, one with empathy particularly, if you're in the mental health field, you are going to be looking at resilience, and you're going to be looking at self-care and really kind of maybe diving deeper into some of those areas of study that deal with how the practitioner handles that, maybe than someone else that had a different theme. But you also are looking at resilience in the bigger picture. And this is actually so accurate for every single theme in every single context. And I'm personally looking at my own this way. We all have the tendency to kind of get into those ruts with our themes. So what does resilience mean? What am I talking about? Each theme tends to kind of go overboard in their own unique ways. And if empathy's version is taking on too much, then monitoring that. And for example, I spoke with a friend of mine who is a therapist, and she very deliberately said to me, she said, you know, when I started out, I was overworking, and I decided that if I'm going to have any longevity in this field, I cannot do any more than 6 hours a day. Period. End of story, no matter what. She said, the day of, I think I can do more. And she said, even 6 hours is a lot. But she said, what I realize is that's my threshold. She said, I might be able to do it that day and that week and then the next week and then the next month, but then I'm just toast and I'm no good to anyone, especially myself. So just taking that kind of thing to heart of looking at, okay, now that you've made those unconscious, you know, things more conscious, and they're not perfect, and it applies every time you have a shift in a situation, you have to reevaluate and relook at them, but then putting things in place so that they don't become that, or extracting things. Some, you know, if we're looking at the health field, maybe there's an area that doesn't drain as much. So I think that's actually a really common thread for people that work with others that have empathy. It's easy for them to take on a lot. So looking at, coping mechanisms specifically for that theme. And that would go for anyone. We were talking about Susan's, example a couple weeks ago of what she was working on with her POM, of just making sure she wasn't overdoing something at the expense of, her health or, and I think that that's where you can really look at these things. We talked about being careful not to deny the needs and the good ways that they serve you. But here's where, when they are in overdrive, here's a good chance to kind of interrupt those patterns. I've found it particularly helpful. So I'm going to stop with that long explanation, see if anyone has any thoughts on that.
So Linda, I have a rut to share, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so I find my ruts tend to come from a combo of my themes, specifically my achiever and my activator, because those often look like I want to get started and I want to get done at the same time. So my rut will, pretty quickly, maybe not at the same time. That would be magic.
But as soon as possible. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
And what I find in project development or, even in my communication, slowing that down or pausing that so that I'm clear on my communication on the journey, or in teamwork when I'm creating like curriculum or pieces. My achiever has a hard time letting a project go before it's at a place where I feel like it's good enough for other people's eyes. And that will then delay my procrastination or appear to be procrastination to other people, right? I'll be working away. It's just not shiny enough to show people. But then what I lose in that is I lose, team camaraderie. I also lose valuable feedback to help me, perfect it before it's actually launched. So what will happen is I'll turn it in where I think it's shiny. And then like Rhonda indicated, those trigger words, someone will say, oh, but what about this? And I've already completed it in my world, right? Like it's there, it's achieved, and then it's soul crushing. And then I hear that, like, you're just talking and I'm not listening because I've already given it its gold star and that's good enough for me, right? So it's interesting how that can become my challenge with those two specifically.
And have you found, because we are all here and we've all done a lot of work on ourself and with others. Have you found there are ways to kind of interrupt those feelings, or are you still kind of working with those? I'm asking that for a reason. So. So I've recently, I think that's a recent like aha moment for me, and that trigger. So I've been able to interrupt them and and I kind of project my achiever out further, right? Because my end game really is a solid product, or my end game really is something that, an inclusive youth leader can use. So if I project it out further, I'm able to really interrupt it and pause it for people to give feedback, right? Send it messy. And then channel, of course, my other themes. So that positivity of good things. And, it's really never that bad of feedback, but yeah, I have to be humble in my request for, I have to dial that down a bit, if you will, so that I get feedback along the way. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great example of how, it might come up again and again, but there is a learning process that requires practice. So there we go into the knowledge and the skill piece. So you just described an activity that can also be like an amazing use of your themes, right? And then here we have a part of that activity that gets you into the rut maybe, or can potentially be a pattern. So now you're looking at that activity and saying, all right, I've got this theme going, it gets me into this. And one of the really great, so now you've got, okay, well, I could look to knowledge, I could look to skill. Well, knowledge would be, let me pull from some of my other talents, or let me take a different approach. Like you can spend some time in the learning process, but then it requires the skill part, which is the practice, especially when you're getting into these patterns that are hard. Practice and just kind of expanding the approach, expanding the knowledge, expanding the kinds of skills you're developing. So what you just described is exactly that. You're like, okay, this is what's happening. It's getting him into a rut. I want to interrupt it. Great. That's all well and good. How? How do you do that? You know? And I think that that's where you can, it doesn't just end like, well, I'm supposed to interrupt it. You don't want to turn it all the way off, which is what we're going to talk about next week. We'll get into that a little bit more depth of what are some of the nuances you can do to dial it in or out. But when you're helping somebody, make sure you kind of pull in that knowledge and skill and just say that skill, that practice piece, and just kind of giving yourself some learning curve. Like I found myself in so many of those same old ruts where I'm like, man, thought I fixed this. Thought that was like done and over, but I'm still working with my same top 5. So, life gives us all these different lovely experiences to practice. So that was a great example. So I kind of took your example and ran with it. So thank you. Anybody else like to share or have any questions about that?
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
So my example was...
Nikki, I think I heard you initially, but then it got muffled.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so my example was with my intellection, and the rut being that since I kind of like thrive off of like deep, meaningful discussions or finding deeper meaning, that I can try to force that on other people. And I just I realized through this whole exploration that, everybody doesn't want to be deep. Everybody doesn't want to learn and do all those things. And so I could be forcing that or feeling frustrated when I say something or I feel like it's going over their head or they misunderstood it. And overall, like from most of the ruts throughout the themes, is that doing for me is producing. So I need to be producing either everything I'm taking in. I need to be producing something in some creative form, one creative form or another, be it writing or talking or teaching, rather than just taking everything in and thinking that I'm supposed to connect to each individual in that manner.
Yep, I think especially there's a few of us that have intellection as the first one, and me included. And so I sympathize. It's that, that when is that full steam ahead and when is that not the best match? And then how do you channel that instead? Mm-hmm. And I agree. With my intellection does a very similar thing where it's like, I have to know everything as much as possible, and then I have to do something with it. It has to be kind of and I think that brings in the ideation and the input as well. But it's like, yes, I enjoy the deep dive, but the teaching, or the sort of expression of it is important. And I think that's a nice, it's like when you catch yourself in those ruts, those mismatches, especially when you're in communication with another theme that may not, so intellection, if you're talking to somebody who just simply doesn't want that depth, that moment, or ever, or, it's just not the way they think or function. I'll tell you, when I first got my results back and I read intellection, I'm like, oh, that explains a lot. Like there's a word for that, first of all. And it really did explain a lot. So where I'm going with this is that sense of each theme has its own version of the rut. And then on top of it, your own personal expression of it combined with your other 5. Because exactly what you said, Nikki, and Leanne, you referenced this too, Diane, you did too. Your rut is usually not operating on its own one single theme at a time. It's usually at least 2, 3, and often all 5 just playing on the, on the field. So just kind of looking at that as you go, and just kind of, I think it takes us from, when we're in the coin model, you've connected to it, you've observed it, interrupting it. Well, we talked about the coin as we learn it in a linear way, but really it's a cycle. So it's like if you're in the interrupt phase, you're going to go back to the observe phase, and say, okay, this is what's happening. Interesting. We put the enablers in one place and the ruts in another, but it's a part of the learning process. But really, once we find these ruts, it is more of a kind of like a step back and observe before you act. And that's what we will get to more next week of the nuance. You can't really turn them off, but you can definitely dial them up or down once you kind of catch them.
Hey, did in anything we've talked about so far, have you guys come across the lag, current, and lead interrupt? Just the distinction of 3 different levels of interrupting. So if our themes are misfiring, let's say we're getting that amygdala hijack or that trigger state that Rhonda was describing. Usually it's like after the fact, right? Like after the meeting is over, after you've calmed down, after you've driven home or talked to somebody, you're like, why didn't I say this thing? Or why did I react that way? Why did I lose my cool? Or do you know what I'm talking about? Or is it just me? Maybe it's just me that happens to, which is fine, right? I know it's not just
what are you talking about? It's not just you.
So that's lag interruption. That's after the fact. There's a lot of lag between when your theme misfired and when you were able to get control over it and even realize that it misfired, right? That's lag interruption. That's progress. To be able to do that after the fact is progress over what people have been able to do before they took StrengthsFinder, right? So I consider it progress if after the fact you're still like, whoa, okay, that theme totally got really triggered by her using that word opportunity or whatever the story is. You never know, right? So the equivalent would be like a horse, getting ready to jump. When your themes will misfire, your themes will go into rutland. It's not a matter of if. It's a matter of when, and it's a matter of what you do when that happens. How long does it take you to recover? In physical fitness, the sign of health is how quickly your heart rate will return to its normal heart rate after exertion. So the same thing is true emotionally. After you've been exerted emotionally or something like that, you've been triggered, how quickly can you return to your original state, your resting state? That's how you're getting better and better at interrupt, is the faster you can return your theme to get healthy and get to its original state, the better, the more mastery you're exerting over that theme. It's progress, it's growth. So that's lag interruption, which is after the fact. There's current interruption where it's like, in the moment, you're like, whoa, my theme, my woo, my harmony, my something is going overboard. My communication's talking a mile a minute. My activator is freaking out to get out of this meeting. That in the moment you recognize it, that's progress. That's current interruption as opposed to lag interruption. Does that make sense? You're catching it in the moment. Lead interruption is where you interrupt a theme because you've anticipated you're going into a situation where your theme could misfire. And an example I use is I was presenting to 350 people a full day talent to strength workshop, and I could not let my ideation or my individualization get too out of whack because it would throw me off my schedule. Someone would ask a question, and I'd want to individualize and ask them questions and really find out what's going on. but I can't do that in a room full of 350 people. It's weird, you know. I'm not good at it.
I have to turn my communication down at church.
Right? That's lead interruption. That's great to recognize that. Oh, I got
My pastor wouldn't appreciate me yapping.
That's lead interruption. And so that's when we get really good at managing our themes and being mindful of it and knowing as we're going into a situation which themes to accentuate and then which themes to dial down. So anyway, that's lag, current, and lead interruption. I've written about it, and I may have talked about it in a video on ruts, but I can't remember. So I wanted to bring that up, see if you have any reactions to it. It's like taking interruption to the next level, like 3 levels of interruption.
So Adam, I have a reaction to that because when you speak of that lead interruption, it's, you know, I like and you've heard this, all of you have heard this, the window and the mirror, you know, as coaches are putting windows up, and then the external environment that we're at really is the mirror, or is the window, right? What's happening around us, what's our external
right, yeah.
And so when you take what you just described and you turn your window into the mirror and you're able to see your reflection in the window, you're able to really marry those things and really function at a high octane level, right? Like whatever that may be, and it's really productive and movement forward. So that's the third piece of my favorite window and mirror analogy is, you know, when you're able to master that and when it's aligned, and when you're looking at yourself in the window and still existing in the looking outside, it's a pretty solid opportunity for you.
Wow, yeah, that's hard to do. But yes, it's doable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. That's great. I'm going to say one more thing and segue us into our talk on themes. Well, we're still talking themes, isn't it? But just to say, too, if you're working with somebody and you need a resource to go to, the ruts section of the theme anatomy, you would look at what need isn't being fulfilled, what's the potential rut, you know, that would be the internal mirror, and then the external, facing the window outward would be the mismatch section. So those would be probably the main sections you would initially look to if you're working with somebody and you want to use the theme anatomy. It's a really nice place to go. Great discussion, guys. I want to make sure we talk a little bit about the executing themes. So I think our discussion was pretty important, so I didn't want to cut it too short at all, but let's talk a little bit. Any questions?
I don't have any.
Oh, you do. You do. They're just not.
My first one is number 11.
Well,
and that's belief. And then after that, I got number 19, and then you don't see another one till like way down.
So I'll ask you this, Rhonda, because this is what happens to me. My executing themes are also not high, but when I have a theme that's particularly not high, I can really recognize it very, very quickly in another person, and their operating system is so different than mine that I marvel at it. Do you feel that way? Like, do you see that when you see someone with achiever and you're watching how they do it?
So it depends on where I'm at and how I'm feeling about my activator maximizer, because that's how I get stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's messy. That's how I execute. I loved this exercise that we did a few weeks ago at the beginning, the 4 domains worksheet.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important that people understand, you know, that if you're a thinker, you still get stuff done. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And that's why Adam and I have even gone back and forth. If we even talk about these in these groupings, we decided yes, because that is how people out there do it, you know, and often if you're going to lead a workshop around this material, you kind of need to know that structure that Gallup uses and all that, of course. So we do it this way, but man, I feel the same way. Like, it is demands, not boxes and labels, and you know, you get a lot of stuff done. It's just going to look very, very different than the way an achiever gets it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, activators are massive workhorses. They're messy. unless they have achiever, and then they get it done.
Yeah.
They're massive in an order.
Well, let's talk to Leanne since she has both.
I adore her. She's
you.
just such a better executor than I am.
Well, in all fairness, I don't know if that's true, but when we, when Adam was speaking in the video about, achievers and having to make lists, and I'm sure we've all talked about that with clients, right? And even if you've accomplished something, you still add it to the list and check it off because it didn't happen.
Right.
And I always was wondering, because I would make lists and then never start them. And once again, it's our themes are all how we do them, because my arranger, number 5, refuses to make lists, because then I'm even telling myself what to do, and nobody gets to tell an arranger what to do because I have to be responsive, right? So my lists now look like, I wish I had my binder with me, they now look like just flow charts, and they're very artsy and up and going, because at any given time I'm going to move something from, number 9 to number 1, but I can't do that if it's in an order, because I'm bossing.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, I'll find one for you. I mean, it's a very creepy look inside my brain, but also where I say things like, don't tell me what to do, or I was doing something, or these words come out of my mouth. So, even though sometimes our other domains or things that are classified, themes that are classified in other domains can really impact how the achiever looks and, how those lists look like for people, right? So,
right.
Can I just say too, that's one of the reasons Talent to Strength exists as it does. It wasn't planned this way, but like when I started learning all this and I started seeing the discrepancy between, for example, what Dr. Clifton would say about strengths versus talents or themes of talent. And then I'd say, well, wait a minute, why aren't we addressing this more fully? What does this strength formula mean? How do we apply it? Are these themes strengths or not? Yes or no? Someone please tell me. That's where I was at the beginning of this. And then with the 4 domains, I was like, so one of the reasons Talent to Strength exists is to kind of correct some of the ways that I believe, and this is a strong statement, I believe I love StrengthsFinder, I respect Gallup, but I think there's a couple of ways that we shoot ourselves in the foot as a strengths movement. And one of those ways is we confuse people, or we don't properly help people understand what these 4 domains mean and not take it and read into it the wrong things. We're trying to get people to a strengths-based place, but they're reading all of this with a deficit-based mindset. And we need to be careful about how we do that as practitioners. And that's one of the things that we bring to the table. And, anyway, that's a soapbox. I recognize that, but it's important.
I know you're not fond of the themes. And it does cause confusion. And it absolutely
the domains. Yeah,
domains. Yeah. And it's absolutely unscientific in my view.
Yeah.
I have a client who has 2 influencing talents, 2 executing talents, and a nurturing talent. And then her next 5 are in the relationship building. I call them nurturers. So 6 out of her top 10 are these relationship building talents. And that is how she drives her whole life, is through relationship.
Right.
But if I looked at her top 5, I would say, where do you want to go? Are you going to go into an executing, or are you going to go over here to the influencing? And she doesn't belong in either one of those. I agree with your frustration around it, because it does. I think that part of it, though, if I can offer, is that as a practitioner and an interventionist, it makes a fun exercise to kind of see people divided up, because there are generalizations you can make about people.
Well, I would say the generalization here, so like the generalization I'd make about the relationship building is typically those themes enjoy and kind of need to be around people and doing things with people. Don't spend too much time alone, where, maybe some of the thinking themes actually need more time alone to process. What I've been, if I'm going to generalize at all, what I would say about the executing themes is get them into action. They don't want to spend a lot of time sitting around doing nothing, like typically. Again, we got to be careful. But
Chop,
if you're
chop.
looking at, you know,
Leanne is like, chop, chop,
Yeah.
guess, get on it.
like if I'm telling Leanne, oh, let's sit here and talk for 4 hours without doing anything, I mean, especially with Activator, she's probably gonna be like, what? Why are we doing it this way? You know, so I think that you can make some really vague generalizations, but I would just say again and again, ask the person the question, how does this show up for you? Examples. Because it's so lovely to hear those, you know, like just hearing about Leanne's version of a list. You know, if we generalize and said every achiever makes a list, well, yes, maybe, and there can be some really great nuances that we miss if we categorize. And so I think that's something we're all careful about. But just as you begin to work with people, you can't ask that question enough. Tell me about how that shows up for you. Give me an example of when you really, you know, because you're going to hear some cool things. I mean, you already know this, especially if you've done this work, but people that are new to it.
Right.
It's just so important. And we're coming up on our time, so I'm just going to give us the homework quickly so that if you do need to go, you can. But we'll stay and talk a little bit more about the executing themes. So next week, you'll watch the Strategic Thinking Themes video. It'll be the session 8. And that's all, it's all in the resources. So you're going to watch the Strategic Themes video. There's a link to it. Then you're going to complete this theme scramble activity and score your answers. So it's a bit of a little fun quiz, just to play with, like, hey, which ones are really obvious to you, which ones are not. These are the short descriptions. We played with which quiz we were going to give you. So I believe we gave you the short descriptions of the themes. And then you want to complete your conversions worksheet or the Z process. So basically, you're going to do the theme scramble activity for sure, and then you're going to pick one of those nuance worksheets. You are welcome to do both. I would be happy to see both, but we don't want to overload you, and that's already a lot. So you have your strategic themes video, you've got your theme scramble, you've got your pre-session video, and then you've got, and I didn't put that on the list, but you've got your 2 worksheets that you could use for nuance. They're slightly different in the way they approach, and so I think pick the one you like. And try to connect with your accountability partner. Adam, can I share the screen for just 1 second? I just want to show them.
Yes.
Because there are a few more parts. We usually just give you one worksheet, but we wanted to make sure you had a chance to get this one in. Okay. So I'm showing you right now, if everybody can see it, this is what the session 8 post looks like. You're going to watch this video, you're going to go watch your strategic themes, then your theme scrambles right here, then here's your answer key so you can score it right away. Your Z model, if you want to do that one, or this one, and then the slides. So let me know if there's any questions, but that's the homework. You're welcome to go if you need to, and then we'll stay to talk more about this.
Yeah, we'll stay. We could talk about it and any of the themes or anything that we've talked about that you want to bring up. So yes, and also if you have something you want to ask, use the raise your hand button so we'll know and we can call on you. And if nobody has the raise your hand button up, we'll all just go. So, anybody have anything for their hands up? We will be around. Okay, we do have one. Nikki.
Hey.
Hey, what's up?
So when you guys were talking about the achiever and activator,
Right.
so just being in this course has been very helpful within the past month or so, because I'm in a group in another community, and one of the leaders has she has achiever. And not that I know this, but once I listened to, I think I was listening to the theme Thursday or just the description of the activator, and I was like, oh my God, that is her all day. Right. And so I sent her, I think, the video, and she resonated with it, and she was like, yep. So before knowing that information, I was really, really frustrated because I felt like the way she was running the group was very bossy, and it was just too regimented, and it was like, go crush your goals and you know, showing us her time management system and all of this stuff. And I really like her, but it was making me not like her. And I was like, I said, I really like her, but I just want to be her friend. I don't want her leading me. She's not to be my leader. Like, but now that I've recognized that it is her talent, it is just her talent, and that it doesn't make her, so she gets a lot of recognition because she gets things done and she helps people out. You know, that's what she does, her business. She helps people make lists and get to their goals and all that stuff. And it's a beautiful thing. But me personally, I wasn't ready for that phase. And so now that I realize that it's just her talent, that it doesn't make her better, it just makes us different, you know.
That's great.
And I think where we connect, because she does have some of the intellection, you know, those things that I have. So I think that's probably where we connect. But that achiever thing was driving me crazy.
Oh, I especially imagine bumping up against the deliberative too.
Oh yeah.
I think that's so well said, because it's like once you know the sort of that shared language of like why they're different, what they're doing, what that behavior pattern looks like, and like you said, you don't have to know exactly what theme. Once you have that, you sort of like language of kind of ways to understand behavior and why it might be different and why it's happening. There's so much more room for understanding in groups, and I love seeing that. I love seeing that in groups. I love seeing that in relationships. It's always a really fun process to me.
I think it's awesome.
But now it's really helpful because I like her and because we connect in other ways. It's more helpful for me because now I know that once I figure out what it is that I actually want to accomplish and to do, that's who I can partner with. Because in my in one of my themes, it says to partner with activator and achiever. And so I was like, you know, I just know that I have to be comfortable in the fact that it's just not my timing because I haven't figured out yet what I want to achieve.
Right. Well, and you're not, you know, with intellection and deliberative, you're not going to move forward until you're ready. And so I think that can be when someone's like, let's go. Why aren't we going? Let's go. That can be like, wait, no. So, but I think that's exactly, I don't know if we talk about it, if we're going to talk about it in this course, but we call it strength drafting. It's that when you can identify, you know, if you're doing an activity and you need some help, you can be very focused on what and who you're pulling in. So that'll be fun to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I want to say, this is why you should be able to, if any of you are trying to do a private practice as a coach or consultant, this is your sales line right here. It's like, do you want your human resources to be capitalized? I was listening to a lecture today by Malcolm Gladwell, and this idea of capitalization of human talent is like a real thing. It's like something people measure. I didn't know. I'm going to look into this more. But it's like, to what degree are we really having people play to their fullest potential? It's a human issue. So I come at it from a humanistic angle. That's my personal angle. But there's a business angle for sure to this about maximizing resources. And so we're really excited to be getting to this soon. We're going to be working on our groups to teams training that incorporates, you know, that'll incorporate that idea that being able to see these qualities in people can help us really align the relationships where in one sense they could go off the rails if we're not careful, and in the other they could form wonderfully complementary relationships. Anyway, I know Leanne had her hand up, but before we do that, any response to any of that, and then we'll get Leanne in. Leanne, what's up? Thanks for raising your hand.
So I wanted to just have a touch point on Nikki's because I find it, you know, it's something that I've heard before strengths, before I had that language And it's interesting because I've been sharing with people this story of a woman that I worked with, and we collaborated on a lot of really amazing projects. And at one point in time, she was very frustrated with me, and she called me a bully.
Oh.
And someone with positivity and developer, and we were friends, and I went, why is she calling me a bully? And I took a step back, and I tried to figure out why. And I was in the middle of my journey of becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach, and she had deliberative in her top 5. And I realized, one, it's a very harsh word for me, but not necessarily for her. So I put more weight on it. It was a trigger word for me, but it was accurate, because my achiever and my activator really was bullying her deliberative, and it wasn't intentional. And this new 34 report that Clifton Strengths just came out with about the way they talk about weaknesses, and it's anything that gets in your way, right? Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, and with our themes coming up to each other and meeting each other in that way, I really was a bully, and it really was a weakness for me. And she brought it to my attention, and then I reframed the conversation. I said, how can I create meetings where you don't feel this urgency or this my time management and my need to get started and finished in an hour? And really the answer was simple for her. It was, well, we have a meeting on Monday, send it to me on Friday so I can percolate on it for a weekend. And it was a really easy fix. I already had that done. So just sent it to her, and it wasn't formal because we already had a close relationship. And then it changed that whole.
What a great story. You should write that story up. It's a great one. It really illustrates the value of what we're all trying to do for people. I mean, right? Like, you're not, for her to say you're being a bully, that wasn't true. You weren't objectively being a bully, but did she feel bullied? Yeah, maybe did she feel pressured to move faster than she wanted to move because her whole life has been practicing this deliberative theme, and your whole life has been practicing the activator theme, and they have totally different things that they bring to the party. Anyway, so I think it's a great story, and it so fits with what Nikki was talking about. Nikki, I don't want to ask you if you felt bullied in your scenario. Well, I kind of do. I want you to feel comfortable saying, no, I didn't feel bullied, but I felt pressured, because it was your deliberative and your intellection that were probably feeling feeling like irritated. Anyway, Nikki, any thoughts on that? You're on mute. No, man.
Oh no, I love the story, I think I may have used bully too.
Okay. Yeah.
just because I think she might have a little command or something. I don't know. She got something else going on with her where it's just like it's aggression. Like she's aggressive, and it's like she speaks with power. And I was like, man, I love her dearly. And go ahead.
Oh. I was going to say, we haven't talked about it yet, but I'd love to talk about our thoughts on assertiveness versus aggression or passiveness. We really believe in that idea of being assertive and not being aggressive, and really finding that right sweet spot, and not being passive, but also being assertive. That actually we need to, if we really want to be like fully authentic and express ourselves, we need to do that. So it's a really good, to talk about that distinction between feeling, assertive versus aggressive. Anyway, story for another day.
But it has definitely made me even more passionate about personality diversity, and just being, finding ways to share that information. Because like I said, we are in a DISC environment, but it's really kind of like the colors, we use here, but you're only really dealing with those 4 quadrants of,
that's right,
generalizations. Yeah. But when you're dealing with 34 strengths, themes, you're being more specific and giving direct language to a bunch of different talents and where they rank, and it all comes, it's all very different.
That's awesome. And you made me so happy, because that's exactly what I would do too. Is I was calling them strengths for a while, the themes, I was referring to them as strengths, because I didn't know. And then I had to catch and correct, and I would catch myself saying strengths, and then I would correct myself just like you did, even in front of my clients, so I can model it for them. And now it's not a problem to I almost never refer to the themes as strengths now. And it was just something I practiced. I interrupted, the pattern and changed it. But anyway, I appreciate you modeling that too. That was awesome. All right. Any other hands up? Okay. Sorry we didn't get to go into like some nitty gritty into these different themes. We didn't get to talk about discipline at all or tell you where this image came from. Because like I saw it somewhere very specifically and I'm like, yes, that's the image of discipline. Anyway, and focus, because we have a lot of focus in this group. I think we're going to start a trend too, purple work boots.
That's what I'm missing. Can I borrow y'all's?
I know, right? Yeah.
My number 23. I don't have much of that.
Yeah. And there we go. Anyway, so we didn't get to go into them too much today, but that's why you had the video. So there's that. All right. So Belinda, any parting thoughts?
No, I just want to thank everyone for being here. And if you want to come to, so next week we'll have session 8, and then there is a best practice call coming up. I want to say it's the 20th, but I'll check me on that date. You'll get the email.
It is the 20th. I got you. It's the 20th at 4 p.m. Central Time.
Thank you. Yeah, that'll be happening in a couple weeks. That's, again, not mandatory to this. And we'll be skipping the week of Thanksgiving, of course, for our class on the 22nd. So I'm pretty sure everybody would remember that. But if you are not in the country and don't celebrate Thanksgiving, just keep that in mind. We'll be taking the 22nd off, picking it back up again. But we have, next week, of course. So looking forward to...
Do that reminder again, because Jim wasn't here to hear it. So we'll do that reminder next week.
Yeah, well, I'll put it in the email to everybody.
Okay.
To kind of keep a heads up on the next few weeks. But yeah, thank you. Great to see everyone. Looking forward to next week. Send me your worksheets if you get them done. I love seeing them.
Yeah, guys, we really do. And you guys are doing great. And we'll be in touch if you need anything. See you next time.
See you guys.